There are a lot of different ways to voice any given seventh chord. In this video, I'd like to show you a whopping 132 of them for major seventh chords, because that's the kind of music nerd I am. Okay, let's establish a few things first. In jazz, where seventh chords are most common, we can treat major seventh and major sixth chords as interchangeable. In other words, whenever you see C major 7 on a chart, you can substitute C6, and vice versa. In pop music, where we also find these chords, albeit less frequently, we have to be a little more careful with that. Secondly, many of the voicings I'll talk about don't actually contain the root of the chord. In jazz, it is understood that that missing root is either added in the low register by the left hand, or by a bass player if we're in a band situation, or even just implied by the overall harmonic context. Obviously, it would be challenging to remember 132 individual voicings, so I've put them together into groups based on voicing type or structure to make it a little more manageable. I also gave myself the following constraint. All the voicings contain 2 guide tones, either 3 and 7 or 3 and 6. More on guide tones later. Now, not all voicings always have to contain guide tones, but most of them do, and if I don't give myself some constraints, we'll be here all day. And finally, all the voicings will represent C major 7 or C6. Alright, the first group of voicings is basic chord shapes in close position and their inversions. Here's C major 7 in root position. First inversion, second inversion, and third inversion. Here's C6. Again, in jazz this is interchangeable with C major 7. In root position, first inversion, second inversion, third inversion. A very common variation of these close position voicings is a technique called drop 2, where we take the second voice from the top and drop it down an octave. This creates open position voicings that are usually played with both hands. So here's C major 7 in root position again. And the second voice from the top is the G, which I'll drop down the octave, and there's my drop 2 voicing. And I can do the same with the other inversions. And I can do the same with the basic C6 chord shape and its inversions. One of the hallmarks of jazz voicings is that they usually contain extensions, 9 and or 11 and or 13, to make them more dissonant, more colorful, more interesting. The first extension we'll add to our chords is the 9th. So for close position, instead of 1, 3, 5 and 7 or 6, we'll use 3, 5, 7 or 6 and 9. In other words, we're moving the whole shape up a third. And if you're thinking, that looks like an E minor 7 chord, well, that's because it's an E minor 7 chord. Except, once I add the C in the bass, it becomes a C major 9 chord. When we practice rootless voicings, it's good to add the root in the bass occasionally, just to hear the sound of each voicing as part of the complete chord, including the root. So we got our basic 3, 5, 7, 9 shape, which we can also invert. And here's the same thing with 6 instead of 7. And once again, we can play all these close position 9th chord shapes in drop 2. A very common way to voice seventh chords, especially in pop music, is to split off the root of a basic root position chord shape and play it in the bass register. Here's our C major 7 chord. I'll split off the root and drop it down an octave or two. The The remaining notes, 3, 5 and 7, form a triad that is played with the right hand. So a simple algorithm for voicing a major 7th chord would be this. Play the root with your left hand in the bass, then find the major 3rd, and play a minor triad off that note. We can then invert that triad at will while keeping the root in the left hand. We can also beef up the voicing by doubling one of the triad notes, like this. I can use the same idea with the C6 chord, although that's maybe less common. A concept that is thrown around a lot in jazz education is that of guide tones. This usually refers to the 3rd and 7th of a chord or the 3rd and the 6th. Most jazz voicings are built on a foundation of these guide tones, so it's good to really know them well for each chord quality and in all 12 keys. Here are the guide tones for C major 7, and here they are for C6. We can play them by themselves or with the root in the bass. Here's a really famous pop music example of this. On the song September by Earth, Wind and Fire, the piano plays guide tone voicings for a lot of the song, like this. These guide tone voicings are somewhat rudimentary, but as far as expressing the quality of the chord, they are sufficient, as long as somebody plays the root, either you or the bass player. But where it really gets interesting is when we start adding notes to the guide tones. Alright, let's add a 3rd note to these guide tone voicings and see what new options that gives us. Starting with 3 and 7, we can add the root at the top, or the 9, or the 13 in the middle, or the sharp 11. Starting with 3 and 6, we can add the root at the top, or the 9, or the sharp 11 in the middle. Starting with 7 and 3, we can add the 13 at the top, or the sharp 11, or the 9 in the middle, or the root. We could even add the sharp 11 all the way down here to get this cool chordal shape. Starting with 6 and 3 in B position, we can add the sharp 11 at the top, or the 9 in the middle, or the root, or the 7. While many of these voicings contain either the 7th or the 6th, it is also very common to have both of them in the same voicing, in which case the 6 is technically a 13th. Here are some close position 4-note voicings with both 6 and 7. Three of these also sound great in drop 2. Block chords are close position 4-note voicings with the top note doubled an octave down by the left hand. So you end up with 5 notes. They can sound a little old-fashioned, but they're still very useful, especially if you're not playing in a very contemporary style. We can do this with basic major 7 shapes, or major 6 shapes, major 9 shapes are also very common for block chords. And it also works with 6/9 chords. Overlap voicings, that's my own name that I made up, are created by playing 2 one-handed voicings at the same time so that they overlap in the middle. I did a whole video on these, link in the description. Here are some of my favorite ones for C major 7. So What voicings, named after the Miles Davis tune So What, are 5-note voicings that contain the notes of a pentatonic scale. They are very common, especially in their root position form, but they can also be inverted to great effect. There are 3 different So What voicings we can use on major 7th chords. The one starting on the 3rd, in this case E, the one starting on the 6th, in this case A, and for major 7 sharp 11 chords, we can use the one starting on the 7th, in this case B. Upper structures are triads embedded within larger chord structures. A lot of people only apply this concept to dominant 7th chords, but I think it's equally useful for other 7th chords as well. For example, looking at a C major 9 chord, there is a G major triad embedded that is formed by the 5, 7 and 9th. That's an upper structure. Note that by most definitions, upper structures have to contain at least one extension. So these upper structure chords are a really easy way to create fancy two-hand voicings. For example, for our C major 7 chord, we can start with the 3 and the 6, and then add a G major triad in different inversions. Or we can play any close position one-hand voicing in our left hand and then play the G major triad with our right hand higher up on the piano. The major triad off of the 5th is my favorite upper structure for major 7 chords. Two other ones that are really cool and that include a sharp 11 are a major triad off of the 2nd degree or the 9th and a minor triad off of the 7th. In this case that would be a D major triad or a B minor triad. Here are a couple of examples. Here's a simple recipe for octave voicings. Play a one-hand voicing in your left hand, then add an octave with your right hand higher up on the piano, and then fill in the octave with 1 or 2 extra notes. Usually a 4th or a 5th or a 6th from the bottom note are best. The octave can be any note that fits the chord quality. There are a lot of possible combinations for this type of voicing. Here are some of my faves for a major 7 chord. And finally, here are a few voicings that I really like, that don't neatly fit into any of the previous categories. Here are a few that are built on a foundation of root and 5th. This one, or this, or this, or this. I can move the root and 5th down an octave, then I can do this, or this, or this. And here's a couple more. And that's it for today. I hope you got some value from this video. Like and subscribe if you did, and I'll see you next time. Bye.